The chains feel heavy as two prisoners are dragged into two separate interrogation rooms. The reason for the heavy security and the handcuffs: we've both been arrested, charged for stealing a few wallets. Here, there's me, I'm one of the prisoners, and the other can be you, or Bob. Now, the regular sentence for this offense is 1 year in prison each. However, it has also been suspected that one of us has been in cahoots with some secret villain organization, charged with stealing a very famous painting. Now, within these separate interrogation rooms, Kaitlyn, or I, have been given two choices. I can either testify and completely throw Bob under the bus, or I can stay silent, and Bob gets the same choice. Now, if I choose to testify while Bob stays silent, then I get 0 years in prison, while his sentence is upped to 5. However, if we both choose to stay silent, we each only get 1 year in jail. And if we both choose to speak up and throw each other under the bus, completely sabotaging our partnership, we each will get 3 years in prison. So given this, the rational choice seems pretty clear, considering us, like many other humans, are both rational and self-interested. We would probably benefit the most from just staying quiet, enduring that 1 year in prison and heading off to continue being robbers in our next lives. However, me, as one of the players and one of the prisoners, my perspective is a bit different. Because if, for example, I choose to stay silent, there are two options that persist. Either Bob also chooses to stay silent, great, we each get 1 year, or he testifies, and I end up slaving away 5 years of my life in a jail cell. But on the other side of the scenario, if I choose to testify, if I choose to throw him under the bus, either he stays silent and I get 0 years in prison while he gets 5, or we both talk and end up with 3 years each. Another very rational and simple choice, am I right? Just looking at the numbers, it is quite clear that testifying will always be my best option, and so will Bob, leading us both to rat each other out, but at the end of the day, not really yielding the best option. Now, what I have just described is something very interesting. It's called the prisoner's dilemma, a concept designed by Rand Corporation that's pioneering understanding of social dilemmas, individual rationality, and as we'll later discuss, game theory. By using a very hypothetical, fictional scenario of two rational actors choosing rather to stay silent or to testify, this really demonstrates the crossroads between individual action and mutual benefit, explaining that even if we both act rationally, we might not always yield the best outcome. Now, you might think of game theory, if you've heard it before, as just another chapter of your economics textbook, as just another hypothetical scenario helping to describe some crazy mathematical concepts or whatnot. But just like how economics is truly the study of decision-making and choices rather than just money, bonds, stocks, and graphs, game theory's applications extend far beyond the textbook and chalkboards. From flirting with someone you might find cute, or global solutions to world issues, or even the solution to climate advocacy. The issue that game theory tackles, which is individual versus collective, is deeply rooted in almost all issues within today. So in this TED Talk, I want to not only educate you all on some really simple, easy, fun concepts that I find interesting in game theory, but to also raise awareness for game theory's applications in linguistics, advocacy, and how using and embracing economic thinking can help us or not help us with our decision making every day. So before we get started, I want to go through some vocabulary and concepts to help us better understand the economic ramifications of game theory. So, firstly then, I want to talk about strategic interdependence, which is basically kind of rooted in the definition of game theory. According to Cambridge Dictionary, the definition of game theory is the mathematical theories that evolve when decisions are made in that one person's actions deeply impacts another's. For example, in my cell, I'm sitting there thinking, hey, what is Bob gonna do? Is he gonna rat me out? Is he a good friend? Is he a good colleague, a good partner? Or do I not trust him? Do I think, maybe he'll just stay silent? Secondly, let's talk about the dominant strategy. So before I was mentioning, it's always best for me to testify, no matter what, because at the end of the day, I'll probably get less than 5 years if I do so. So the option that always yields the best outcome for me will be the dominant strategy. And because as humans, we're always trying to maximize our positive payoffs, or spending less time in jail, and minimizing our negative payoffs, or spending less time in jail, it is clear to say that even when we do exude our dominant strategy, sometimes that does not work in our favor. But hey, I'm no economics professor, nor am I a game theory mathematician. I am simply a high school student, and I guess there's something that I'm a bit more expert in as a high school student, which is flirting. And yeah, I do find myself to be quite shy and reserved in some of these scenarios that, relate to flirting. But there has been some times where, I find someone cute in my math class. And as you all know, maybe you've all had a crush before, the dilemma is always as presented. Do I talk to them? Do I confess my feelings or just stay silent? Or in a relationship even, when is it appropriate to say, I love you? Well, these very complex questions that keep us up at night can really be demonstrated in the same game theory table that we talked about before. So, say person A wants to say, I love you, and person B also says, I love you back. Everyone's happy. But if one person isn't ready and doesn't reciprocate, that leaves someone feeling hurt at the end. Therefore, the dominant strategy is to just not say anything unless you're absolutely certain that they will say, I love you back. Or let's talk about another social setting that I know probably a lot of us has been in before. As a teenager, I've been more than experienced with, the awkward chuckles and pauses of small talk. And engaging in small talk again, we can see through the table. So, say person A, doesn't really like small talk. It's universally known that small talk is quite awkward, even though there is a strategic interdependence between if we choose to engage in small talk and what we expect the other person to want. So, if I don't really like small talk, but I think, oh, hey, Bob over there, he expects small talk. He's ready to talk about the weather. I will likely engage in small talk because if not, he might be offended. But because you can't really predict what Bob likes, the really obvious decision is just to engage in small talk, to just, keep everyone happy, even though it might be mildly discomforting for both of us. Whether it comes to how vague or detailed we say certain things, or the etiquette behind flirting, or even the relational pronouns and clauses that make up our languages. These language conventions can be deep-rooted in context and how we perceive the other person to perceive us. according to Nick Zanwell's article in the Journal of Language Evolution. He believed that things such as correlating an idea to a word, or even, saying fire when you're talking about fire and not water, that is all rooted in game theory and how we think other people think of us. Or how we point at an apple and say, hey, this is an apple, when we're teaching babies to understand ideas and learning fruit names. Or when we call our dogs by their names multiple times to make sure they get that link between that word, that sound that comes out of our mouths, and them. It's the same thing with game theory. And as well, game theory can help us with basic human interactions. Again, knowing when to say I love you based off of what you think the other person will think. Now, this is called game theoretic linguistics, and it's simply just the study of the strategic behavior behind languages. It's when, we try to maximize the amount of positive payoff, which is, again, good communication and minimizing bad communication or confusion. Game theory can often be useful by making sure that we're saying what we want in order to best express ourselves. Now, I think this is really interesting because oftentimes I catch myself, at an awkward pause in the conversation, not knowing how to proceed, or not knowing, what to text back, how to confront a friend, or how to confess to someone more than a friend. So for all the logicians out there, you can use game theory to try to logic yourself out of sticky situations, especially when it comes to conversations. So now we talked about, our conversations, we talked about linguistics, but what about the collective? So now I've heard a lot of TED Talks that are really great talking about how game theory can help us understand things like war, like conflict, like big market systems. But what I want to do is zone in on how this impacts us, to our everyday actions, an action as simple as littering. So picture this scenario. You're walking your dog, trying to get home, trying to, use up that 5 minutes between your lunch break and your next meeting. And you happen to finish a bottle of water. So there's two options. Either you go back to that trash can 10 meters away and throw it out, or you leave it sitting on the side of the sidewalk. So now, even though it's universally known that littering is unethical, it's bad, and the eco-friendly option is sitting just mere meters behind you, a lot of people choose to litter. And the reason is simple. We rationalize our littering because we think other people won't. We think, what's one bottle gonna do? It's just one bottle, and someone else will probably pick it up. I have somewhere to be. I have a meeting to catch. And that common thinking is, it's pretty common, but what happens when you litter one thing is it builds up, and that one plastic bottle ends up contributing to the 15 billion plastic bottles within our environment from 2012 to 2020. Or that 5-minute drive instead of the 20-minute walk that you take contributes to the 37 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide that's emitted into our environment every single year. This not my problem mentality is what we would like to describe the tragedy of the commons, where our individual self-interest results in collective action problems that yield a net bad for society. And it's because of the tragedy of the commons where, climate activism and political change is really hard. Because if everyone thinks it's not their problem, if everyone doesn't want to do anything about it, how do we rally people to make real change? How do we truly get started? How do we make change? So, in that sense, what is the solution? What is the solution when big corporations don't want to turn eco-friendly because, yeah, it's expensive, but also they know that those companies that continue to profit off of our environment will continue to outproduce, outsource, and outsell the ones who don't every single time. How do we get rid of the crossroads for policymakers, advocates, companies, and even ourselves, where the solution to simple problems are right in front of us, but we choose to ignore it? Well, I can't give you a clear and exact solution to corporate greed or climate change or littering, but it is worth noting that when one person or one company acts, it often leads to a chain reaction where other companies follow suit, either to continue with their reputations or even to follow a trend. Or for example, when you go up to someone and start initiating a heartfelt conversation that's not just, how's your day, how's the weather going, oftentimes they will reciprocate and you'll end up having a great conversation. Although it's hard at times, sometimes choosing the non-dominant strategy is really what works best. And that's what can help you defy the barriers to finding the solutions to problems in our everyday lives. So, again, easier said than done, but my call to action for all of you is simple. Ditch game theory, ditch logic, ditch economics, and take that risk. Sure, acknowledge what economics tells you about what the other person might, react or perceive, but really take the risk to advocate, to rally, to talk to someone new, to say, I love you. Because, as George Bernard Shaw says, a reasonable man adopts himself to the world, but an unreasonable man persists in adapting the world to himself. Thus, all change and progress stems from the unreasonable. So stay unreasonable, take that risk, and remember, game theory in the process, or don't. Thank you.